Hey, Howard.
In case you need a lawyer, here's my business card. I'm attorney Howard Ankin.
Oh, hey, Howard.
If you or someone you know has been hurt at work, Ankin Law can get the medical bills paid, the lost wages reimbursed,
Oh, hey, Howard.
and the compensation you deserve.
Hey, Howard.
We're one of the largest filers throughout the state of Illinois of workers' compensation claims. We're here to help. Call 312-6-million. Injury law made personal, that's Ankin Law.
From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine Podcast with your hosts, Jim Margulis, James Fegan, and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Robin. Welcome to the Sox Machine Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Nelson, and it's Tuesday night, November 4th, 2025, as we bring you this new episode. We finally have some off-season news. Days after the Los Angeles Dodgers were able to come back in Game 7, an epic Game 7, an epic World Series, as the Dodgers have now won consecutive World Series championships, Major League Baseball has gotten in a hurry in getting the offseason rolling. Players have declared for free agency, teams have made decisions with player options. The White Sox are one of those teams as they picked up Luis Robert Jr.'s option for $20 million in the 2026 season, but declined Martin Perez's $10 million option for a $1.5 million buyout. But thanks to our James Fegan, Sox Machine can report that the White Sox have hired their new pitching and hitting coaches. On the pitching front, it's Zach Bove, former assistant pitching coach of the Kansas City Royals. White Sox general manager Chris Getz shared why Bove was ultimately the right choice to take over from Ethan Katz.
We're excited to bring in Zach. You know, it was an exhaustive process, a long list of candidates, and you know what we learned very, very early on is the intelligence, the character. You know, you look at his resume, what he's accomplished at every step along the way, and his reputation throughout the league is very strong. The synergy, you know, was another thing that really stood out between Brian Bannister. You know, Will, the coaching staff, we just feel like he's a great fit. He represents the pillars that you know, that we have prioritized here with the White Sox organization as we're looking to find improvement. So yeah, we're very excited to, you know, have Zach part of the organization. Currently, we're out in Arizona right now having leadership meetings. Zach is here, and we are getting started in preparation for our 2026 season, and look forward to seeing what Zach and our group can accomplish, you know, for the upcoming year.
Will Venable also shared the same excitement as Getz with Bove coming into the fold, as he not only understands the technical aspect of being a pitching coach, but also the human side.
Extremely excited about the addition of Zach to our staff. Like Getzy said, you know, very early on in our process, which was very exhaustive, and you know, we talked to a lot of people, heard from a lot of really incredible people across the league. Zach stood out from the beginning as somebody that just had a skill set that was going to be impactful in every regard. And then as you lined up his strengths with some of our needs, and how that matched up with our pitching staff and how we want to develop this group and take the next step, there was no question that he was the right person. And as we've continued to talk and kind of peel back the layers on how he can be effective, how he matches up in improving our players, we just couldn't be more excited to have him. He's not only somebody that is technically proficient and has an understanding of how to improve pitching. This guy is somebody that has done an amazing job creating buy-in on the front end by being somebody that on a human level can connect with people and really make a difference. So really excited about Zach and can't wait to get to work with him.
There's been speculation that when the White Sox decided to move on from Katz, that it was Venable needing his guys, end quote. Getz shared what the hiring process was actually like for both the pitching and hitting coaches, but iterates that the actual hire is still part of this front office collaboration.
collaborative effort. Will and I communicate regularly. We identified, what areas needed to be improved, and then there's the how. And through that process, we decided to move on from some individuals, and then obviously as you work through a hiring process, you target a long list, work through it, and then you come to a decision together. Just to kind of walk through what the process looked like. There was a writing assignment, case studies, multiple panels. A lot of people are involved in the interview process, and then there's different phases of it, and you work towards making an offer and someone accepting it. So it's never been about Will getting his guys or Chris getting his guys. It's really what's best for the organization. One of the reasons that Will really stood out last year as we were hiring him is, he was going to work closely with myself, the front office, other coaches throughout the organization, on the major league staff, that he was someone that was not, definitive that he had to have his guys. And, that's oftentimes what can develop in organizations, where Will is about what's best for the White Sox. And certainly we found alignment with Zach Bove.
Bove has an interesting background as a former collegiate two-way player trying to learn the ropes and becoming a pitching coach.
Mostly a hitter in college, pitched a little bit in high school, came to college as a two-way guy, but started my coaching career at College of Central Florida, where I played for Marty Smith and was the hitting coach for the first 2 years. And after the second year, kind of let go of the pitching coach, and Marty's the one that said, "Hey, you're going to take over the pitching." And at the time, I did not want to do it, but he said, "You're going to be really good." A lot of trust in me, and you fast forward, so that was 2014 to where we are now, right? So just a lot of learning along the way. A lot of people helped me get here. A lot of fortunate situations, at CF, the Twins, the Royals. So a lot of support throughout the years, but kind of having maybe a different take on the pitching realm, just because of my background and kind of what led me to where I am. I couldn't just fall back on, well, this is what I did as a pitcher, right? So I just searched for the best way to go about it. I was totally open, it's kind of around the time when all this information was coming, Twitter and, the drive lines and all that stuff. So just really open, talked to a lot of people in the game, use my playing experience as a way to okay, this is what I struggle with as a hitter. So, maybe there's value in kind of educating our pitchers on that. So again, try to use all resources available to make, at the end of the day, it's still the goal to make the pitchers better, just create an environment that is conducive to their own development and always open to a better way about going about it.
This will be Bove's first pitching coach gig, as he served as assistant with Kansas City. Bove shared why he thought he was a good fit for the White Sox.
The Royals were great for my own development, great for my family, really enjoyed it. It's really cool to see, where we were 3 years ago, where they were, obviously last year making the playoffs, and this year, continuing that pitching development. So a lot of people were involved with that. I learned a ton from over there, Brian Sweeney, Q, the whole staff, everyone. But as I got through this process, right, you just kind of see the people of the White Sox, like Getzy, Baney, hearing Will's vision. So that really aligned with kind of how I view pitching and just development. And then you look at the roster, right, playing these guys in division, their growth from last year to even the beginning of this year to end of the year, right? There's definitely things to work with. It's super exciting to kind of, again, just partner with these guys and get them better.
Our James Fegan did ask Bove if he had any previous relationships with the current White Sox front office, and his answer may surprise you.
What was your familiarity level with, Chris, Will, Brian Bannister coming in, if you had any, and how, if not, how did that, sense that this would be a fit that you could, work well with these people, kind of come along through the course of the interview process?
Yeah, I really didn't have a strong relationship with anybody. Obviously, with Getz being from the Royals, people that were still with the Royals had always said positive things, and as I went through this process, leaned on them. Will didn't really know, but as you talk to him, you kind of hear his passion, his vision, definitely aligned there. And Baney, again, didn't know personally, but kind of knew him from afar. The information that Baney puts out, obviously extremely bright, and always respected him as a pitching mind, but didn't really have any specific relationships with anybody previously.
Next step for Bove is introducing himself to the White Sox pitching staff, understanding that it will be a learning process for everyone involved.
I just want to get to know them first, right? Establish a relationship, understand what's important to them, right? I'm not coming here with a specific agenda. Obviously, I have my beliefs, but it's going to be matched up with what these guys want, right? Just show, understand what they want, what they need. Obviously, we're diving in, this week and through data, you understand, previous results, but like, hey, what's the setback, right? Or how can we take that next step to their career? So it's really just learning to know them as people, and then we can start layering on the pitching specific things from there that excited to kind of, share with everybody.
Joining me on the podcast to provide reaction to the hirings and chat about Chris Getz's comments about the upcoming free agency, and Luis Robert Jr. is officially coming back. It's Sox Machine's beat reporter James Fegan and managing editor Jim Margulis. And hello, gentlemen. James, you broke the story on SoxMachine.com about the White Sox not only hiring Zach Bove as the new pitching coach, but also Derek Shoman as the new hitting coach of the White Sox. We heard from both Getz and Venable about how exhaustive and collaborative this hiring process was for the White Sox in deciding on Bove being the guy to replace Eat the Cats. From your deep understanding on how the White Sox pitching management hierarchy works, what's your reaction to the White Sox hiring Bove?
What's my personal reaction? It seemed a little bit like eye rolling there as he talked about the exhaustive process for hiring him.
They love talking about the hiring process. They love talking about how collaborative it is. I rolled my eyes, James, only because for those listening to this podcast, man, does that sound very corporate America.
It does. The intensity of the corporate-ish of the talk was elevated throughout. I think I had prolonged exposure to it over the course of the Zoom. That said, we are now, they officially hired their pitching coach. They showed the whole pitching operations. So they're just bringing back Matt Weiss. They're going to announce Derek Shoman. I don't know the assistant hitting coach. Maybe it's just Joel McKeithen coming back since they never said he was going out. So he stands to reason he's being retained. But certainly some of the White Sox coaches going out after the end of last season felt like this is an opportunity for Will Venable to get his guys that it didn't happen last time. I think we at least alluded to that in our piece. When they did not renew people, we still don't have a token Will Venable guy who's worked with them. There's no Pedro Gaffol had Eddie Rodriguez, and he had why is his name escaping me right now? Mike Tozar. Those kind of people who have been with him the whole time. Obviously Tony La Russa gets associated with Dave Duncan. Throughout his run. Will Venable does not have an analog at this point, and he's had every opportunity to over the last 2 years. They haven't, gotten old cronies of his, or I think, and definitely in talking over the last few days about so what's kind of the connection here with Bove and Shoman to existing personnel, and there wasn't really anything there. I don't think the 1 year that overlap between Jin Wong and Zach Bove being hired as assistant pitching coach was a bond for life sort of situation. There's some familiarity, but I think they're talking up this the exhaustive process. This guy worked his way up through our interview process after being our initial long list of candidates, because there's not the traditional space would be touting a previous work experience or comfort with the organization. And even Bove said because Getz was a former Royal, he knew about him. So when he started this process, he got that's a good guy, you'll be fine. And he obviously knew of Bannister as being in the pitching coaching world. That's a name that's been publicized, but he said he didn't have relationships with anyone. So at least in terms of this guy got hired off his interview process, there's not much to refute it at this point. We'll see if it leads to success or ruin. But that's something there. As far as initial reactions, it seems like he was steeped. It's hard to I think maybe 3-4 years ago, or even just pre Ethan Katz, having a major league pitching coach who's saying I'm into biomechanics, I'm into finding creative solutions or paying attention to the analytics would be yes, we need somebody in this place saying this and affirming this, even if it's boilerplate for any coach in the league. I think Cats kind of did that. And also we were at a point in pitching coaches where we kind of expect all our pitching coaches to talk like this to a degree, where the fact that Bove was primarily a hitter in college, he did pitch a little bit. He at least started college as a two-way player, but doesn't have like this former pitcher background. That's a little atypical, but also like not so much that it's some big story across the league that someone with this background got this sort of position, especially since he was an assistant pitching coach for the last 3 years. So I think it kind of doesn't stand too far out in a good way in terms of like, this seems like a normal hiring process, but even if it feels a lot of like corporate overspeak talking about it, it does still stand out in the terms of, insularity issue that, this White Sox leadership group was talking about as a problem, even just in 2023 when they first got hired, and certainly still dealt with a lot of pushback on how much it seemed like people they were, even just like a couple spring training ago, Getz was explaining decisions like, hey, I'm going to go with the people I know and go with the connections I'm comfortable with. It seems like this is at least a little bit stepping you out of that space where they were just getting started and they had a smaller network around the league. Even if this is laughably just another former Royal, it's not even the same generation of Royals, as Getz and Wong, where it's has that same connection.
A follow-up, James. Any chance, speaking about the hiring process, that we can get a copy at Sox Machine of the written exam that we could review and maybe write a future blog and maybe even test our podcast listeners and our daily readers if they can pass the written exam for the Chicago White Sox?
Yes, I'm also curious. Like, was it short answer? Was it essay? Not to like, I haven't asked any about this, not to like prognosticate. That sounds like a classic. I float that to Getz and he's like, maybe at one point, and then comes back a week later like, I asked a few people and I absolutely cannot do that. sort of progression. Maybe not. We'll see. That's just my initial gut response of how that would likely play out.
Okay, so Jim, with Bove being another ex-Royals hire, I do see some of this reaction on social media that White Sox fans are skeptical because of Pedro Grifol. But is there anything in particular you are interested in seeing what Bove can do to help improve the White Sox, at least on the pitching side?
Well, I think when you look at the way they piece together a pretty effective bullpen, I think that's one of the areas you can look at and say, what was his impact there? Because when you look at the arrangement of late inning arms they had Carlos Estevez, 42 saves, leading the league. You had like Lucas Ursek, Dane Dunning's nemesis. I always think of him as delivering like a ton of innings and a ton of good ones. Angel Zerpa, you have a whole bunch of guys, who are, lefties, righties, high octane arms, a good mix, and not a whole lot of money going into that bullpen, but a lot of results coming out of it. And they had such a craptastic offense, especially in the outfield for so much of the year, and yet they were on the periphery of the postseason race, or the wild card race. They finished over 500, and a lot of it was just pitching, and a lot of it was pitchers you might not know. There are also pitchers that like Seth Lugo. They've identified between him and Michael Wacha, even like Michael Lorenzen, like they've gotten good returns on their free agent investments in pitchers, and they've also developed some young arms as well. The one area where I'm kind of fascinated by, because the White Sox have been so deficient about it, is the controlling the running game. Like the Royals have been superior to the rest of the league in controlling the running game. I remember looking this up 2 years ago when Chris Flexen kind of caught my eye for being, having really good defensive metrics and having really good base running suppression numbers, despite the number of base runners he allowed. And you had a whole bunch of White Sox pitchers at the time, Garrett Crochet, who could afford to allow stolen bases because he was awesome. But then you had like Drew Thorpe and Nick Nastrini, who didn't necessarily have those margins getting run on. Then you had Chris Flexen, pitching the whole year, as many base runners as he allowed, only 6 steals in 10 attempts. And he also defended his position well. And so I thought like, is this guy going to win a Gold Glove, or is going to be under consideration? And then you looked at the finalists, and it was like him and a bunch of Royals. It's basically the entire pitching staff were defensive experts. And I thought, I wrote a post about it saying, I wonder if this is a way for the White Sox to, a margin for them to attack. If the Royals are doing it The White Sox have a guy who's shown that you can survive despite unimpressive stuff while doing it, and then they didn't do it. They had kind of poor results when it came to suppressing the running game. So I think that's going to be one area where, it doesn't necessarily cost money to get pitcher defense, and certainly you don't want to test it too much by having so many base runners. But given where they are, given the the athletes that they have on the mound, they don't have like a whole bunch of stiffs on the mound or big lumbering guys. They have guys who should be able to field their positions and have decent pickoff moves. I'm curious what kind of impact that'll have. I guess the counterpoint that I'll raise to myself, because I looked it up, was that Lugo, Waka, Lorenzen, the name brand free agent pitchers they acquired, all were good at suppressing the running game before they joined the Royals. So is it a case where they develop it? Is it a case where they look for pitchers who can do it and count on the added value, the way that like we saw Mark Burley consistently pitch or overperform his FIP because of just how much runners on first stayed at first? Curious to see how it affects player acquisition, but I think that's really the most interesting part, and probably the most immediately applicable part is seeing whether there's any improvements and what kind of pitchers the White Sox acquire, since they do need to go shopping in that department.
Yes, and that is a question that James did ask Chris Getz. You could check out that response on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Sox Machine. We have a bunch of clips outside of the hire. Getz did talk about free agency. We'll talk about Getz's comments about free agency later in this podcast. When it comes to Bove, though, James, since he's so new to the White Sox and he's only familiar watching the team from his perspective in the opposing team's dugout in 2025, this is still on Brian Bannister, right? This is Brian Bannister's show, and Bove is working with Bannister to apply some of the overhead strategy onto the field and what the White Sox still want to do from a pitching front, right?
I mean, he definitely got referenced a lot. That was probably one of the first lines of, Chris Getz started lauding Bove, was that they thought he worked well, or had synergy, as he put it, with Bannister right away. So yeah, I think that's, at least at this point after 2 years, if either that's a vital point of being able to run White Sox pitching is fitting in with someone who's doing kind of the larger, 30,000 feet designs of development for a lot of the young arms, or after 2 years of Bannister being on staff and seeing how many like positive stories have been tied to him or development of breakthroughs have been tied to him, everyone knows that you kind of have to reference that the new pitching coach is aligned with Bannister to get buy-in. But yeah, they haven't had any like big relationship across them. Like, if anything, like as far as like people have experience working with Bannister, like obviously Ethan Katz was a really strong Bannister connection coming in, both from the Giants, and working with Gabe Kapler, who's now with the Marlins GM, and probably someone I'm gonna be talking to about Derek Shoman next week. But Bove is someone who's seemingly like done well in the interviews, but it's all been behind the scenes as far as their interaction together. They seem like they should get along based on like their things they focus on, but as far as like some sort of prior work history, some big connection, Bove was straight up saying like, of Bannister from being in pitching circles and you have respect for him, but never really talked to him before. So we'll see. You want the interview process to be something that actually matters and not just something that's a shoo-in. Here's a situation where it's great. Maybe it's the only determining factor, and thus it puts all the pressure on, do the White Sox get the best candidate from their interview process really well, as much as anything, which I guess is what it should be tested on. But it's another thing that's kind of new and opaque to us as outside viewers until we see it work on the field. Like I think hopefully the way I put it in the article, not just in my head, was that like I think the last couple of years on the White Sox pitching side, you could point to a lot of success stories with Garrett Crochet, or like how Jonathan Cannon kind of came out of nowhere in 2024 to this past year with Shane Smith, obviously, or Davis Martin being a kind of a solid 4 ERA type of back end starter after being a third day draft pick. But as far as like the last time this unit was like above average into something, missing bats or controlling walks or controlling the run game, or obviously just controlling runs, that's taken a little bit longer. And I think, part of that is not even just reflected all on the previous coaching staff, but now with what they did at the end of last year. I don't know, like you're not expecting like a top 10 pitching staff, but this is probably a year when, in terms of taking a step forward as an organization, you want to see that performance not be like, oh, well, they're 28th and everything, but look at these two guys we produced. That bodes well going forward. I think you're now at a point where you can start having some expectations as a unit to like, if this is going to be a good pitching staff, they should stop looking, bottom 10 in the league in some categories going forward. And that's maybe pressure or standards you can apply to Bove going forward that are interesting, even if I don't know what to tell you to expect about it, because I'm talking about an assistant pitching coach that from a team I didn't cover. So we'll see.
Yeah, I look forward to those conversations that you have with Zach Bove before and during the upcoming season. Welcome to the White Sox, Zach Bove. Remember, it's completely your fault if the White Sox can't fix the walk issue, if Hagen Smith doesn't develop, the bullpen's still blowing games. But hey, welcome. You are an official Major League Baseball pitching coach.
I'm curious if he's going to age the way that Ethan Katz did my mind. Like, it's funny, like when Bove was like, oh, they're getting a young guy. And then I realized like, oh, Ethan Katz is 43. He's not old. So he just kind of looked that way, or he carried himself that way based on just how many disgruntled mound visits he seemed to make, or just how many shots of him in the dugout, just kind of staring bleakly at the proceedings based on like bases loaded walks or like going to the bullpen phone. So yeah, just the job could age him a little bit. I'm also really fascinated, and I think this will be explored too with the Shoman thing, is just the Will Venable's presence and, the quotes that he had about kind of deferring on the minutia of the lineup, saying like, oh, that's what the analytics people have said about like Joshua Palacios batting 4th or 5th or something like that. And then just kind of being hands off or collaborative, not feeling the need to put a stamp on this staff with one of his own guys. I'm curious. Yeah, he cuts an interesting profile because I think like he carries himself like a manager in terms of like the public speaking part of it, the twice a day with the media. Didn't really see him stick his foot in his mouth at any point or have anything to walk back. I thought he handled that part well, but in terms of like, you don't see the general aspect to him in terms of like, I need my lieutenants. I need, we're going to play Will Venable baseball. It's kind of like right now, maybe it's so far away from being a cohesive product that he doesn't know what's going to be leading the way in terms of what makes him relevant. So perhaps it's a case where this is just I'm not going to try to force a team to do something it can't do if it can do something better sooner that I didn't have in mind. So I'm going to wait till the team has an identity and then I'll shape myself to it. But it's interesting. Like we're not seeing him be a new sheriff in town. We're just seeing him kind of going along with it right now. And that either means like that he's going to manage the White Sox for 35 years because he can get along with anybody and everybody's generally pleased the way he does things, or like, if they don't go anywhere, does he like make himself a presence? Interesting. Like, I don't know what to think either way.
He immediately demonstrated his faith in analytics by the fact that analytics told him to bat Joshua Palacios 3rd, and he was like, all right, and then moved on. It didn't say like, all right, but this sounds like malarkey to me. I'm questioning this.
I wonder if it's just gonna be like, my thought of it was like, all my choices suck. I'm gonna save my capital for like decisions I really care about versus like having somebody underqualified batting 3rd to 5th and just you shuffled anyway and none of it looks good.
I mean, even that would show, I guess, a long-term vision at least at some point. Speaking, I don't know what tangent I was basing it off of, but like I asked about walks because I think that's probably the result that you could say from the last 3 pitching staffs that like clearly like kind of screams out a little bit to like what's going on here. How do we address this? I think the White Sox have been either bottom 2 or bottom 3 or in terms of walk rate the last 3 years. But walks is almost like being tough on crime a little bit. Like you can fire all the walk late ridden pitchers and fire the pitching coach who oversaw the walking and still be kind of, you've done a lot of things, but you haven't really addressed the source that's bringing walks about, which is, under talented pitchers who don't have stuff that they feel like they can pitch in the zone with and wind up nibbling. And that's kind of ultimately an organizational thing they need to address. So I wonder, like, they kind of said, like, in asking about it, they kind of said similar things like, oh, we got to get ahead of the counts. We got to have first pitch strikes. We got to get count leverage. Something that you certainly wouldn't not hear the previous coaching staff say. I ultimately think, like, as far as like addressing walks, like a lot of it is just like you have to increase the talent level of the pitching staff. But I wonder, like, at least with Bove coming in, knowing that's been a weakness of the group or the performance, are there some tricks? Are there some tactics that get it at least, hey, even if we have a kind of nibbling talent level staff, that we're 20th in walks and not 28th? Like, what sort of measures do they have to make this, like, not to play up a little bit from what it's been? Obviously it can't be like a, number one lowest walk rate staff in baseball if you're nothing but like 93-mile-an-hour sinkers. You can't live that way. You'll give up 2 home runs per game. But, like, is there something they can do to address this that makes it more than just like a cheap kind of knee-jerk thing to say, like, they walk too many people, thus they need a new pitching coach?
Yeah, I was joking earlier, James. It's not his fault.
I know, but you were joking, but, like, it was something I asked about, and I think it is something that, like, you look at the results and like, well, something's amiss here. How do we address it? And I want to see, like, is there something?
Yeah, it does harken the pitching philosophy. Can you help a pitcher be better at command, right? Or is that just something they naturally have? I think you can help develop it, but there's going to be a great case study with Hagen Smith for the Chicago White Sox, and now Zach Bove in the fold as the new Chicago White Sox pitching coach. Now, James, the White Sox haven't officially announced their new hitting coach. We're expecting that press release, I don't know, sometime later this week, maybe before the winter meetings. We'll see.
Winter meetings?
But Shoman entering the fold as the new White Sox hitting coach. He does have Chicago ties. He's been an assistant hitting coach with the Minnesota Twins and the Miami Marlins. What else should White Sox fans know about the new hitting coach?
He's kind of similar, not like he was a pitcher in college level type of rise to Bove, but, like, played in college, played some independent ball, but, like, not a former big leaguer, not a former even, like, affiliated player, someone who's kind of risen through the ranks in coaching. Obviously, spent a lot of years coaching with the Schaumburg Boomers, including the year that they offered their facility to the White Sox as an alternate site. But not that I think that that's a particular connection. He came his way through the Twins, and it was working really hand in hand with David Popkins, was the Twins, who kind of became a scapegoat a little bit towards the end of his, like any hitting coach does. And it was fired alongside him after the 2024 season. Popkins goes on to Toronto, where it's kind of a different offense style than I think we associate with the Twins, which I think was a bit more power and too many strikeouts toward the end, where the Blue Jays became this extreme contact team, which kind of points to the idea, like, if you want a clear example that, like, the offensive style tends to hew more towards, like, personnel than the hitting coach saying, here's what you do in every at bat, to the likes of, like, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and everything. I think it's a good testament. But obviously Shoman went on to the Marlins, which probably under the radar a little bit, but maybe not under the radar if you paid attention to the fact that they hired Peter Bendix and Gabe Kapler, but became a very analytics-oriented organization over this past year, probably more so than we ever associated with them. And then there are things I don't know how much you want to embrace, like the coaches calling signs in the dugout element that they've embraced, but certainly not behind the times in terms of like modern baseball. The organization in the past, and they were part of a year where maybe a lot of it was pitching, defensive, base running oriented, but that Marlins team obviously overperformed what we thought their talent level was, and was able to coax out coherent offensive efforts, even without, like, outside of like Kyle Stowers' breakout season, a ton of like big names on offense. So he's been a rising person in this league, and a lot of it's been around like his comfort with the modern swing decision work and what goes into that, and also a lot of just like perfecting swing pass and a lot of visualization and biomechanic work behind that. So he seems to be, not that it's like this big separator that it might have been 10 years ago, but he seems to be as conversant with all the elements that what you want in a pitching coach or hitting coach, I should say. Not that they haven't confused us with these origin stories a little bit, but until you put it in practices, he's not necessarily, in being an assistant, someone you've seen quoted a ton or talked about like in great detail, like transformation stories of hitters that we can easily point to. But in terms of what he's been conversant in, how he's had to work his way up, it seems a lot similar to Bove, where it's like he's had to be on top of all the new modern ways, because it's certainly not his name brand getting him into the door anywhere. This is not like hiring a former Hall of Famer who hit really well to be a hitting coach, or hiring someone who's clearly just tight with the GM to be the hitting coach. This seems to be somebody who's more or less grinded their way up to this point. And I think the White Sox, if they're going to be successful, if they're going to have overperformance stories, probably need to be the team that are the first franchise that's willing to give that guy the main job. And so that's, I guess, what they're trying to do here.
Well, we'll hear more from Shoman when the White Sox make that announcement. I envision another Zoom press conference in the near future for James Fegan. But again, a reminder, we will be sending James out to Las Vegas next week for the general manager meetings. I want to give a shout out to our wonderful Sox Machine subscribers. Thank you guys for your continued support. That allows us to send James out to Vegas, and who knows, maybe he can steal Chris Getz, and we can get more insight on what Getz is preparing for the White Sox this offseason. But Chris Getz did make a couple decisions for the roster. Many of you have also made these decisions in the Sox Machine offseason plan projects. I'm getting a kick. I'm catching up here as I'm wrapping up my offseason plan project, and that will be posted on SoxMachine.com soon. But in other news, and Jim, you wrote about this, Luis Robert Jr. is officially back with the Chicago White Sox for 2026. They have officially picked up his $20 million contract option. Martin Perez, he was bought out for $1.5 million as the White Sox declined his $10 million option. So all the seconds and minutes and hours that we talked about a potential Luis Robert trade at some point in 2025, well, baby, we could bring all those conversations back starting on July 1st. But until July 1st, during this press conference, Chris Getz has every intention that Luis Robert Jr. will be the White Sox center fielder to start the season. So let's go ahead and take all those winter meetings and spring training, possible Luis Robert Jr. trade conversations, set those aside, because so far I have to take Chris Getz for his word. He hasn't played us at all. But Jim, you wrote about this particular decision. It's not a great decision when you really break it down for everyone involved. There is a bit of deal of risk here for the White Sox. Again, Luis Robert continues to miss time for various injuries, and there's going to be a lot of attention paid to his legs in 2026. Can his hamstrings hold up? Is he going to have a nagging groin injury? Can he play more than 140 games? Because I didn't know this until you wrote about it. Luis Robert's $20 million is one of the highest single season contracts that Jerry Reinsdorf has ever paid during his tenure as White Sox owner. Is that true?
Yeah, like single season salaries. Yeah.
Wow.
It's Yohan Moncada, 24 million, and then Robert, because James Shields made 21 million during his 2 years with the White Sox, two full seasons. Half? Yeah, Padres. Yeah. And they're happy to do so. Like it was money well spent for the Padres.
Yohan Moncada,
or whatever,
when he made 24 million, Jim, that's the most that Jerry Reinsdorf has ever paid in a season to one player.
Yes.
So the White Sox have never paid anyone 25 million or more.
Right.
How many teams have not done that?
I imagine
I don't know off the top of my head. But
imagine similar overlap with like the A's and Pirates and like the ones who have been with the White Sox with the sub $100 million largest contracts ever. Those teams typically don't go for like the big AAVs either. They tend to spread the money around, every year.
Sure. True.
Yeah. So it's, it is a rare case of the White Sox actually exercising an option for the players they extended, because I think Tim Anderson had one option that the White Sox exercised, Moncada didn't get to his options. Jimenez didn't get to his options. So it's kind of fitting like that. When you get to exercising a Robert option, it's a very unpleasant exercise. It's more like it's either a correct, put in quotes, say like, a safer bet to not give him the money based on his track record. And then you have some egg on your face, or you double down, do a Pedro Grifol double down and say, no, we really think that he can do this, even though he misses at least 50 games every year he plays, aside from one. And then you get fooled again. He pulls the football on you, and you have that kind of embarrassment. So either way, it's like not a very flattering decision to make. And I think it comes down to, where are the White Sox going to spend the money? And, if they don't spend the money here, would they actually spend it based on their either their risk tolerance or their attractiveness to free agents who would serve that same kind of purpose?
And again, if the White Sox do not trade Luis Robert, we get to play out this scenario at the end of 2026 as there's a $2 million buyout or $20 million option for 2027. Chris Getz was asked about the CBA negotiations, if that has any impact on what the White Sox will be doing this upcoming offseason. It doesn't sound like that is the case, James, but here is the quote that has gotten some White Sox fans, especially on social media, talking. Here's Chris Getz about his attitude towards this upcoming free agency.
Obviously free agency is an avenue to bring in players to help in the win total. But to go beyond, this upcoming season, I think would be a little premature considering the state of our club right now and the development of these young players. So more than anything, we want to strengthen our coaching staff, improve our processes within the front office, and go out there and try to win as many games as we can next year.
Again, to quote Getz, to go beyond this upcoming season would be a little premature. That quote, James, is where I think a lot of White Sox fans are putting a hook in right now and saying, okay, Getz has admitted, don't expect multi-year contracts. Is that a fair assessment for White Sox fans that we could just see a bunch of one-year contracts this offseason?
I would have expected it to mostly be one-year contracts, even if I hadn't heard them say this or factor in, I guess, the lockout as well. Like, obviously last year was entirely one-year contracts. And I want to say the only multi-year contract under Getz is Fetty, which seems a little bit like the necessity of the market at the time, a little bit to get him. And it was still obviously not paying market value. It wasn't paying like, Fetty off of 2 good years with the Reds or something, and giving him a 2-year deal. It was more, this is still a way to pay under market because he's coming from the KBO. And it just so happens 2 years is what's needed, which, if anything, wound up probably making him a better trade asset than he would have been otherwise. So it's not jarring on its own, but you can definitely see, I think, with their team situation and 2027 dovetailing a little bit of they're not really in a position to plan out who's going to be, or at least not shop for who's going to be on their next winning team in this offseason so much. I already thought like 2 years was something of a stretch goal, like if they really want a Zach Littell type of situation, as was, or like, if there was another like KBO or MPB signing that kind of made sense a little bit for them, and multi-year is what it took to be needed to make that commitment. But yeah, I think that's a fair interpretation that, one, they're already probably not inclined to really push. They've been, definitely pumping the brakes on what they're going to do free agency since while the season was still going. And on top of that, I don't think it's like kind of the same reaction a little bit where, you see maybe the Cubs making moves inspired by that. And there's a little bit of but we're still going to try to win in 2026 a little bit. I don't think Getz has to undercut those type of feelings as much, but certainly in terms of where you were late August, early September, was like, hey, can this team try to play 500 ball next year? Because they're playing it right now. And if they're playing 500 ball, doesn't that have them like probably not more than arm's length out of the wild card race deep into the second half? And what does that inspire them to do? I think it's been a pretty steady drawback from that that no, that's not really how they see things, and this only lines up with that even further. But again, he opened his season-ending presser by saying the most important thing is development of our young players, which is already not too advanced GM code for don't get your hopes up, focus on Kyle Teal highlights, and go to bed.
Hey, someone's in the home run derby, Jim, right, for the Arizona Fall League. Is it Ryan Galaney?
Yeah, Galaney.
Yeah, Galaney's in the home run derby. That helps with player development, right?
I mean, like, it helps him practice hitting homers, which he needs.
Yeah, there you go. In my upcoming offseason plan project, podcast listeners, I wrote about this, so this is a bit of a tease. And I explain my rationale and thinking and how I'm handling the offseason plan project, knowing that Jerry Reinsdorf is still the chairman of the Chicago White Sox. Jim, I have 7 free agent signings in my upcoming offseason plan project. All 7 are on 1-year deals. If Chris Getz in the White Sox front office shares my line of thinking, like that is all they're going to entertain is 1-year deals. While it's not a splashy offseason, could it be a busy offseason, Jim, for the White Sox? Because if they do hit, let's say even 5 free agent signings, at least that keeps us busy and at least gets the White Sox, or at least White Sox fans, something to talk about during the offseason than rather sit on our hands and wait to see what 3-year guy can't sign a 1-year deal because nobody's interested in signing 3-year deals until the beginning part of spring training in February.
Well, Getz has been very friendly for blogs, in terms of just meeting out this content, having like a weekly signing, or even if it's like lower level, or, they have an announcement about coaches being hired or player development staffs to kind of fill in these gaps. So it seems like he really has a, kind of a feel for the news cycle and feels when things are drying up. And I really appreciate that. It's probably my favorite quality of his so far. So
he on his whiteboard, he must have a content delivery schedule. He's like, I got to feed these guys.
Yeah. And it's great. Like, here's a Michael A. Taylor. Like, cool. Wasn't exactly what I wanted, but it was when I wanted it. And so he's great at that. So, he has that going for him. I think, like, he's still in the White Sox roster, still in this, no stone unturned mode of just, they have to look for interesting waiver claims. They have to look for, retreads or fallen prospects anywhere where they have the playing time, because that's still their biggest luxury is playing time and low stakes and the runway to get it right. So I could see like a lot of 1-year signings, but I could also see like 1-year signings that, for players who are still like pre-arb or, don't have 6 years of service time, to where 1 year becomes 2 years or 3 years if they actually hit on it right. Or like Rule 5 picks, that sort of thing. Like they have that kind of opportunity still to find a fixture without handing 2 or 3 years up front, if they manage to have the right people in place or have the right idea that unlocks somebody, or just happens to get somebody who's like finally healthy. Like there are a lot of different ways those kind of stories happen. And so I think, the coaches that they've hired, we'll hear more about Shoman, but in terms of just the willingness to swap out coaches and bring in people from different organizations, bring in people with different backgrounds, it's perhaps a case of, well, we didn't really hit on as many, role player searches as we wanted to. So maybe, we're finding diminishing returns with this department. Let's see if we can shake this up and get a guy. It's basically what they need to do, is just like find guys who they're not like getting to trade. Cause I think that's the, it's cool to get an Adrian Hauser or an Austin Slater, or guys who are, good at, certain things and are marketable to other teams, but like you're just, turning them into low-level prospects who have a long shot of actually developing into those guys for the 26-man roster, and it just kind of goes in a circle until the big prospects hit and everything like that. So I think it's really a case where, they still have to sign these guys who are, 26, 27, 28 years old and just haven't hit on it yet, and see if they're one pitch away, one tweak away, one hand adjustment away from being like decent and being somebody that can be rostered and be major league players. to make the shopping list a little shorter in years where the White Sox are contending.
Well, I think the final note on this podcast, though, Getz reiterated many times throughout the press conference, James, pitching for the Chicago White Sox. But he also mentioned that this is a focus for all teams in Major League Baseball. So Chris Getz and the White Sox could have some pretty stiff competition going after pitchers this offseason.
A little bit. I mean, I think as far as like the roster of kind of back end starter candidates, I felt like, I mean, that entire article I worked up was guys I felt like would be kind of off the top 50 in terms of, free agent candidates, including some of the, command specialists from the MPB that I was wasted too many late hours getting excited about. So like, I think there are options there, or they could even absorb like a year of a contract of somebody that, other teams are trying to dump that they still could eat innings without thinking of specific candidates. But, looking back, they signed, if you count Michael Taylor in spring training, they signed 6 guys to one-year contracts last year. And I think a similar path is repeatable. I think there's another Martin Perez on the market. It doesn't have to be Martin himself, needed as given his injury history, but I think there's similar tier. Like I think maybe some of the shortages in free agency or some of the scarcity would be affecting probably a higher tier than what you're shopping for. I think if we need to add a number 2 starter, there's only so many dance partners to really go around before you start getting desperate. Right. I think if it's like we need a number 4 guy that we think can eat 150 innings without setting the stadium on fire, I think there's probably a bit more possibilities from the Perez too. And it's more about what matches up with the development level. And is that expanding beyond the East-West sinker baller, 6K per 9 guy who somehow, produces a 4.1 ERA, and we're all kind of like, man, what a great job they did to get that out of him? Or is it somebody who can, maybe do a bit more? You think about content delivery schedule. I like to think of Getz reading the headlines of all the Sox blogs and just kind of having a general sense of the people are hungry. type of feeling some mornings. Like he sees some like retrospective on like the 1978 White Sox or something that's not spurred by anything. It's like, I think I need to give him something.
Yeah. He was so happy to see you guys. Watching the Zoom video, he was happy to see the media.
I'm sure that it's happy to see us, in an appropriate setting to talk about things that are on the record and not calling him about things that are not public yet. I'm sure he prefers that standpoint.
I didn't like how he opened with, "This is about Zach Bove." Like, do not ask about anybody else, please.
Yeah. Well, James will get a chance to run into Chris Getz next week in Las Vegas, and we'll have more reporting from Vegas during the general manager meetings. Again, we are waiting for the White Sox to officially announce the new hitting coach, so we'll get more video and more audio in the upcoming podcast. But that will do it for this episode of the Sox Machine Podcast, as we actually had White Sox news to talk about. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you just discovered the Sox Machine Podcast, you can subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts, such as Spotify and Apple Music. I already teased it, but we're going to have additional videos from the press conference from Chris Getz, White Sox manager Will Venable, and of course, White Sox new pitching coach Zach Bove. You can go ahead and check that out on youtube.com/Sox Machine. If you do watch our videos on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button. We greatly appreciate it. Follow us on social media. We're on all the social media platforms at Sox Machine. You can follow James at JR Fegan. You can follow me at Sox Machine_Josh. If you enjoy our work and want full access to all of our coverage of the Chicago White Sox and Major League Baseball, sign up to become a Sox Machine subscriber at SoxMachine.com. Monthly plans start at $5, and that gets you the ad-free version of both the podcast and the website. Also unlocks the comment section for you. We also have our Veterans Committee, and our VC members have been hearing about these names in the Sox Machine group chat for days. So if you want this type of insider information regarding the Chicago White Sox, you want to be in the know before it gets announced, again, we have spots open in the Sox Machine Veterans Committee. Inquire within at SoxMachine.com. The Sox Machine Podcast is a production of SoxMachine.com. You're on for all things Chicago White Sox baseball and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside Jim Margulis and James Fegan, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for listening and watching.